Greetings, everyone. My name's Greg, and this is the second lecture in my building a course in Unity for an idle game. And I'm calling this my first idle game. If you need the context or the introduction, go back. But in this video, we're going to begin actually writing our first script and putting the foundation in place for this idle game. So we have our enemy. We're going to want to click on them and have the gold go up as we click on them. Now, the mechanics are going to get more complex as we go on, but we want to start with these really simple mechanics. So even the very first beginning developer, if this is your first game course, you're going to be able to follow along. So the next thing we really need to do, if we're going to have any actions in our game or have any kind of gameplay at all, is we have to create a script. So to create a script, I can come down here into our project window and right click, choose create, and then come up and just say C# script. And now it defaults it to new behavior. You never want to use that. Instead, we're going to just call this enemy because we're going to put this on the enemy image for now. And that's what we're going to do. So now that we have a script and we have our images, you can see things are getting a little bit, I guess you'd say, disorganized. So let's make two folders, one for our images and one for our scripts. That, and scripts. That, and we're going to drag our enemy script into the scripts folder, and it'll do a recompile. You'll see here when it does that. It's always going to be doing that when you're moving things around, because when you move it to a different folder, it has to compile it. And if that term is confusing in this book that I'm creating along with this course, because this course is going to have a full book along with it, you'll see here at the bottom I have a glossary of all these terms here that you can look up. And as I'm building this, I'm going to be watching the comments. I hope you guys will comment when I miss something or there's something about me building out this course that you don't like, because this is kind of the rough draft of it. I'm building this course out in more of a real time for people, and so they can give feedback and see the development process of how these courses come together. So next, we want to actually, one thing we want to do is we want to rename this gold text object, which I forgot to do. And so I'm going to call it gold text. I usually like to refer to the object type over here because this little image doesn't give us any clue as to what they are. So I'll usually say what it's for and then the type. So in this case, it's enemy image. This is gold text. When we put buttons down that are just standalone buttons, I'll usually call them whatever button. And so on. So I just try to keep a consistent naming convention is really important as a developer. Use terms that are easily understood. Another pro tip is use the same terms your users or in-game people that are actually going to play the game. And that kind of comes from enterprise development. I've been an enterprise developer for a long time. One of the biggest mistakes people make building out systems is they use different jargon inside of their game or inside of their code source than they use with their end users. And whenever possible, unless it's something abstract or something completely not relatable in the real world, it's a good idea to use the same term, so that way you guys are using the same vocabulary. And I'm not calling this one enemies and then having it named object in the game or something like that. So, or villain. You wouldn't want to call it a villain in a game in your code, but then refer to every time, like on your screen or when you're talking to the users, as an enemy. Just makes it confusing for developers and for anyone who's looking at your code. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and create our first script, and we're going to make it really super simple at first for those that are brand new. So we open up the script by just double clicking on it. Now, I'm using Writer for my IDE, which is Integrated Development Environment. That is in the glossary. And it's the editor that we use to actually edit our code. And it gives us lots of nice things with syntax coloring, auto-completion, and little details that make it a lot easier to program in. And I'm using Writer, but you can do really well in Visual Studio Code or you can use Visual Studio. There's multiple development environments, but Writer's free trial is great, and you can just download it for free and try it. And it's definitely, in my opinion, the best IDE or development environment for Unity, because it has a lot of really nice Unity things incorporated into it. So I'm going to hit Trust and Open. We're going to open this puppy up. And this will be the very first script. This is your first C# script that you're creating as part of this course. And there's a couple of things we'll notice about just the structure of these scripts. At the top, you're going to have using statements. And using statements are what load other libraries in so that the script can access them. So since we're working with the Unity engine, we need to say using Unity engine in here so that we can use everything that Unity engine needs. If I delete this, this mono behavior immediately turns red because without the Unity engine, it can't implement it. So there's no way you could include this on a game object or use it inside a Unity scene. And I can just put this back in. Just an undo. Now, these are gray because they're not even being used yet, but Unity's kind of expecting that they're so common, people use them so much that they're in there. We're not like that. We're going to get rid of that. And so we just have using Unity engine. And as we build things, there's going to be times where we'll be adding things up here because we're going to be using different libraries. We have a class definition up here at the top where we say public class, and then we name what the class is. And this is named enemy. Something to note that in Unity, you need to name enemy, the file name, the same as the class. It doesn't mean you can't have other classes in here as well in this file, but you need to have a class that matches the file name. And then you also need to have that mono behavior in there so we can work with it inside of Unity, inside of the scene. We have these little curly braces that are always going to enclose our classes. And then you can see that these same little curly braces also are what determine the scope and outline for any method. So this void start is a method. Some people might call it a function in C#. They're synonymous. And we can see here that because we're in Writer, you might not see this in Visual Studio Code unless there's some plugin you got. But you'll see here that it knows that this is an event function, and it tells us right there that start is called on the frame when a script is enabled just before any update methods are called the first time. So this is called one time at the very beginning of the game. This event function update that gets called automatically again, because these are event functions, Unity is calling these for us. They're making things happen. An update gets called every frame. So if you're running a game that's 60 frames a second, this is going to get called 60 times every second. If the game is at 30 frames a second, this will get called 30 times a second. Most of the time we try not to use this unless we have to, and in the first part of this game, we certainly don't have to. When we get into the timers, for the idle timer, that's when we're going to use an update event. And probably the only place in this game where we will use an update event is in the timers, unless we do something really, really special with some kind of click mini game or something like that. So what we're going to be looking at is this start method. And it shows here, this is a comment. Comments are always prefaced. They start with 2 forward slashes like that, and anything you write here is ignored. Doesn't happen. So you can use it to comment and give information about what you're doing, and that's important. Don't get excessive with comments, but if there's code that's a little bit confusing or you're struggling when you're writing it, comments can really help give context to your code and help people understand how it works. And even yourself, if you've been away for a few weeks or maybe a year or something, and you come back, those comments will really help you understand what you're trying to do. So for this very, very first little bit of code we're going to write actually write our first line right now. We're going to define a variable. A variable is just a way to collect and store data and give it a name and represent it. And I have these definitions in the book. When you purchase the course, you'll have access to that. And so we're going to begin defining it. by saying public. We're saying it public so we can access it outside of this class. We can access it from the inspector, and we'll actually be able to monitor this variable. And I'm going to call it gold. I'm sorry, int. I have to say int first. And this is where we're describing the type of variable we're creating. In C#, we must define the types of variables. Int is short for integer, and integers are any whole number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2.5 is not an integer because it has a decimal in there or a fraction. And so those are not represented by integers. Those are represented by what are known as floats. So when we're talking about money or cash or anything with a decimal place, we will be using floats in this game. We'll be using them for the timer for sure. And then you have other variable types we'll cover, but just know that in C# you have to define them, and we're defining it here, and we're saying we want to set aside an int, and we're just going to call it gold. And you'll notice that it's gray, and it's gray here in the editor because we're not using it yet. It knows if I mouse over it, it'll tell you serialized field gold is assigned, but its value is never used. It knows it's not being used, and so that just gives you a way to know that you might have created a variable that's just taking up space in memory and you're not even using it. And because what these variables really are doing is they're allocating space in memory. It says I'm going to use, I think it's 4 bits or something, or 8, I don't know. It's using a certain amount of space in memory for this variable. So let's go ahead and assign it a value, because right now it's empty. We're going to come here under start. We're going to say gold equals 1. And that's all we're going to do. We're going to just keep it really simple right now. We'll say gold equals 1. I'm going to save this. And now we can go ahead and see if our script works. This is like the money equivalent of hello world. You got $1. So let's go back to Unity. And it's nice to see we got a fast coming back here again. I actually picked version 2021.23, it is up 2.3 here instead of the 2.5, because this 2.5 version has been very slow for me switching back and forth between the editor. It's doing a lot of really excessive compiles. And so you might encounter things like that with certain versions of Unity. You'll see if you Google it that there's just arbitrary things that can happen. It'll slow it down, and this version just seems to be a little more solid. All right, so right now, if we run it, this script isn't doing anything because this script is just sitting out in our project. And when a script in the project, it does us no good inside a Unity game. We need to get this script into our game. And the easiest way, one of the easiest ways, is to come down here and you can just click Add Component. And if I type in enemy, you can see that it found the enemy script. So I could add it that way. Another way is I could, once again, I'm clicking on the enemy because the enemy is where I want to attach this script for now. I can click the script up and drag it onto the game object. You want to drag it, down here, either at the bottom where it can fit. I think you can drag it maybe up here at the top now. So you're always going to be dragging it next to the add component. And you'll notice that here it says the script is enemy and that our gold is showing up because we specified it as public. So it's literally taking our script there, analyzing it, and saying, hey, these guys have a public variable, an integer named gold. We need to show that in the inspector because it's public. Notice that it's 0. Watch what happens when I run the game. When it runs, it recompiles the script, does some stuff. And if we go and we look here in the inspector, we'll see that gold is 1. Now, if you expected this to change up here, then your expectations were misguided because we didn't do anything but set up a simple variable where we're keeping track of this number. That's all it does. Variables are simple to understand. They're just a place to hold a piece of information. And now we have this enemy component script. It's a component on this inspector, but it's a script component that we've added here. And if I stop running the game, you'll notice if we come down here and look that gold flips back to 0 because it is switching it to 1 when the game starts up right here. So that really is all there is to creating a variable and assigning a value, but we want to be able to click and have the values go up. and add and update it on the screen. Those kind of things. So there's more to do. Right now, when we start the game, we're setting gold. We don't want to start the game and set gold. Instead, what we want to do, and what we can do, is just rename this to on enemy click. And when we name this to on enemy click, it's no longer going to get called in the start method. What we're going to do instead is we're going to wire this to the enemy. And we'll say a button component. And then probably that's just the terminology I'm using right here. But basically what we want to do is when we click on that enemy, we want to call the script and it'll set the gold to 1. So that's what we're going to do here. So we jump back over, and what we'll do is come over to our enemy image and add a component button. And when we add this button component to our image, it makes this guy clickable. And by adding the button on there, that doesn't really accomplish anything except set the component up. And you'll see that we have some attributes here, like whether it's interactable or not. So we can enable or disable it while it still shows up like that. And we have some things where we can change the color and things when it's pressed or selected and things like that. But the most important thing, and the thing we're going to focus on, is this on click. On click means that it's going to raise an event. And right now the list is empty because no one's listening. There's nobody listening to this event. Well, we have somebody that wants to listen to this event. It's this enemy right here script. And we know where the enemy script is. The enemy script is located here on the enemy image. And I'm actually going to rename this now. Instead of calling it enemy image, we're just going to call it enemy because it's more than an image now. We're adding a button to it, and we've got a script on it and things like that. And so on this on click, we want to add an event so that when you click the button here, it's going to notify whoever we put in here. And we know we want to notify enemy. And what's ironic is I could do the same thing by just dragging like the button down here like that. So because we're on the same game object that we're notifying. So the button is on the enemy, but we also want to notify the enemy here. And you'll notice it says no function. When I click this, that we're getting the list from the components. So obviously there's the game object as a component itself. We have the rect transform. We talked about how every game object has a transform component. We have our canvas renderer. There's the image we dropped on, and you can see there's all these methods we could call if we wished when we click that button. None of those are going to do us any good though. And of course we have the button itself that we could, call something in it if we wanted. But what we want to do is we want to go to enemy, and we'll look down through here and go, oh no, we don't see our OnClick method. I wonder why that is. Well, if we jump back over, you'll notice it just says void here. It doesn't have a public. So this onEnemyClick is hidden from, and if I mouse over it, you'll notice that it shows there private void. So private is implied. If you don't say public, it assumes private. So we change that by putting public in front. And when I save this script, which I shouldn't have to save it, if I have auto save set up, it'll save it and compile it as soon as it jumps over for me. And when I click back on our enemy, and it remembered that we dropped that script in here on our OnClick. If we go to the no function, we choose enemy, and then we click onEnemyClick. So notice how it shows up in there now. And so what's literally happening is going to happen. We click this button, it's going to fire off this OnClick event, and then it looks through the listeners and says, hey, who's listening? Well, enemy's listening, the script, and we need to call the onEnemyClick method, and we know what that looks like. So let's go ahead and run this. And we'll notice that when it starts up this time, gold is going to stay 0. Remember when we had it in the start, gold went to 1. This time it stays to 0. But when I click this guy, notice gold went to 1. Now, if I click him again, it still stays 1. That's no fun. So what we want to do is come back to our script, and we can add 1 to this by saying gold equals gold plus 1. And this is just basically telling us we're going to take gold, and we're going to take the value of gold, add 1 to it, and stick it back into gold. So it's going to take this on this side of the equal sign, put them together. We're adding 1 to gold, put it back in there, and now gold would be a plus 1. Now, there's a shorthand here that we can get, and if I right-click this, it'll tell us about it. If I right-click and say Show Context Actions, it'll say To Compound Statement, which means it can write this a little more efficiently, like that. So gold plus equals 1 is exactly the same as gold equals gold plus 1. And so now, if we jump back over here to Unity, let it do its thing with its reloading of its script assemblies and all that, and then run the game, which then it reloads it all again. Yeah, I still have a build of Unity I'm not happy with here, but we'll have to live with it for the moment. Notice it's 0, and every time I click it now, it's going up, and we get the result we expected there. So we created a variable, we've learned how to increment it, we've learned how to call methods, we've learned how to set up buttons. We did accomplish a lot in this lecture. It might not seem a lot, but I think for somebody that's brand new, this would be really helpful at getting your head around building up a script in Unity and getting started. So in the next lecture, we're gonna work on getting it so that this gold gets updated and add some other new functionalities here into our clicker game. So look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.